I've lived in this neighborhood for about 5 years now. It's one of those sleepy suburban streets where nothing much happens. The kind of place where you recognize every car that drives by and can set your watch by your neighbor's routines. It's safe, predictable, even a little boring. Or at least that's what I thought until a few weeks ago. I don't know how to explain this without sounding crazy, but I need to get it off my chest. It started with small, almost laughable things. Glitches, I guess you could call them. I kept telling myself it was just my imagination or that I was overtired. But the more I tried to brush it off, the stranger things became. The first time I noticed something off, it was just a fleeting moment. I was taking out the trash one evening when I saw Mr. Thompson working in his front yard. He lives 2 houses down from me, a retired guy in his late 60s, always puttering around with his plants. I remember thinking how dedicated he was to his garden. He's out there almost every day, trimming hedges or pulling weeds. He waved, and I waved back, nothing unusual about it. But as I walked back to my house, I heard a car approaching. I turned to see Mr. Thompson driving down the street, heading toward his driveway. He parked, got out, and carried a bag of groceries inside, giving me another wave as he went. I stood there, my brain trying to reconcile what I'd just seen. I could have sworn he was in the yard just seconds earlier. I even remembered the blue gardening gloves on his hands and the dirt smudged on his knees. But now he was in a different outfit, holding grocery bags. It didn't make sense. I laughed it off. I figured I must have been mistaken. Maybe he was quicker than I gave him credit for. Maybe there was someone helping him in the yard, though I'd never seen anyone else there before. I told myself I was overthinking it. But then it happened again. A few days later, I was out for a walk in the early evening. It was one of those cool, quiet nights where the air feels crisp, and everything seems sharper, more vivid. I saw Mr. Thompson jogging down the street, wearing a grey sweatshirt and those neon green running shoes that are impossible to miss. I waved, and he gave me a nod, his pace steady as he passed by. I continued my walk, going around the block. When I came back around the corner, I saw him again, this time standing in his driveway, still wearing the same sweatshirt and shoes, but not even out of breath. He was checking his mailbox, casually flipping through letters. It was like he had just materialized there. There was no way he could have doubled back so quickly, not without me seeing him. I looked up and down the street, half expecting to see another man dressed the same way. But there was no one else around, just Mr. Thompson, calmly sorting his mail as if nothing strange had happened. I felt a shiver crawl up my spine. It wasn't fear, not exactly, but a cold, prickling sensation, like my body knew something was wrong even before my mind could catch up. I shook it off and kept walking, refusing to look back. After that, I started noticing it more often. Little inconsistencies that I tried to ignore but kept piling up. I'd see him in his garden in the morning, then again at the store just minutes later. Or I'd pass by his house and see him sitting on the porch, then catch a glimpse of him through the window, standing in his kitchen at the same time. Always the same outfit, the same expression, as if he were frozen in time. I told myself it was nothing. Maybe he just moved fast, or maybe my memory was playing tricks on me. But deep down, I knew that wasn't it. I started paying more attention, watching him out of the corner of my eye whenever I walked by. And the more I watched, the stranger it got. One Saturday morning, I went out to get the mail and saw him mowing his lawn. He was pushing the mower in neat, straight lines, his head down, focused on his work. I glanced away for just a second, just long enough to pull a few letters from the box. When I looked back, the mower was sitting there, engine off, but Mr. Thompson was gone. I stared at the empty yard, waiting for him to come back. But he didn't. There was no sound, no movement, nothing. Just the lawnmower, perfectly lined up with the next row of grass, as if he'd just vanished into thin air. I stood there, gripping the mail so tightly my fingers went numb. I even considered walking over to check, but something stopped me. a tight, uneasy feeling in my chest, warning me not to get any closer. I went back inside and locked the door, pretending I didn't see anything. That was the day I stopped waving to Mr. Thompson. I know how this sounds. Believe me, I've gone over it 100 times, trying to come up with a rational explanation. Maybe I was just seeing things. Maybe I was stressed, overtired, or even losing my mind. But then the other neighbors started acting weird too, and I couldn't ignore it anymore. I don't know what's going on, but I feel like I'm being watched. Not just by Mr. Thompson, but by the whole neighborhood. I used to feel safe here. Now I keep my curtains closed and double-check the locks every night. I don't go outside after dark. I can't shake the feeling that something is wrong, that I'm seeing things I wasn't meant to see. And whatever it is, it's getting closer. After that morning with the lawnmower, I started noticing other things. Not just about Mr. Thompson, but about the whole neighborhood. It was like a curtain had been pulled back, and I was seeing all the cracks that had been there the whole time. I'd catch glimpses of people moving in ways that didn't seem natural, too stiff, too synchronized, like they were all following the same unseen script. They went about their routines, but something about them felt off, like they were just playing a part. One evening I watched Mrs. Evans across the street as she watered her plants. She did it the same way she always did, starting from the left side of the porch and working her way to the right, humming softly to herself. But when I looked out the window a few minutes later, she was doing it again, in the exact same order, same motions, same song. It was like someone had hit a reset button, and she was looping through the same scene. I watched for a while, waiting to see what she'd do when she finished. But she just stopped, turned around, and went back inside without even glancing in my direction. I felt a cold chill run down my spine. It wasn't just her, either. I started seeing it everywhere. Mr. Lee would jog past my house every morning at 7:30, wearing the same red tracksuit, his earbuds in. But one morning he jogged by twice, first going north, then south, without ever turning around. I know because I was watching the whole time, pretending to water my own plants. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe he was doubling back. Maybe he forgot something and went home to get it. But he never looked back, never broke his stride. Just the same steady pace, eyes fixed ahead, like he was following a line only he could see. That feeling of being watched grew stronger. I started noticing faces in windows, staring out blankly as I walked by. But when I looked again, they were gone, like they were just shadows. I'd catch movements at the edge of my vision, curtains twitching, doors closing quietly, as if someone was watching me but didn't want to be seen. I tried to ignore it, to act normal, but it was getting harder. I started taking different routes on my walks, avoiding the houses where I'd seen the most strange behavior. But no matter where I went, they were always there, just out of sight, always watching. One afternoon I decided to go to the park on the other side of town, just to get away from the neighborhood for a while. I figured some fresh air and a change of scenery would clear my head. But as I walked down the path, I saw Mr. Thompson sitting on a bench, his head down, hands folded neatly in his lap. He was wearing the same clothes I'd seen him in that morning, blue jeans and a plaid shirt. He didn't move, didn't look up, just sat there perfectly still, like a statue. I turned around and went home. I didn't go out again for a few days after that. I kept my curtains closed, stayed away from the windows. I spent most of my time in the back of the house, where I couldn't see the street. But it didn't help. I started hearing noises, soft creaks and whispers, footsteps on the porch. Once I heard someone knock on the door, but when I checked, no one was there. I even thought I heard my name. Faint and distant, like someone was calling me from the end of the street. It was always quiet when I looked outside. Too quiet. No cars, no kids playing, no sounds at all. Just empty streets and still houses like the whole neighborhood was holding its breath. I started losing track of time. Days felt longer or shorter, like the hours were stretching and twisting around me. I'd glance at the clock and see that only a few minutes had passed, but it felt like hours. Other times I'd lose whole chunks of time without realizing it, standing in the kitchen one moment, then finding myself in the living room, not remembering how I got there. I thought about calling someone, maybe my brother or one of my old friends from college. But what would I say? That my neighbors were acting weird? That time was slipping around me? That I was seeing people in two places at once? They'd think I was crazy. Maybe I was. I tried to distract myself with TV, but the shows felt wrong. The actors' voices were flat, their smiles too wide, their eyes too empty. I turned it off and sat in the silence, feeling that cold, prickling sensation crawl up my neck again. Then the dreams started. I'd wake up in the middle of the night, my heart pounding, drenched in sweat, with images flashing behind my eyes, faces in the windows, staring at me with blank, empty expressions. Mr. Thompson's face was always the clearest, his eyes fixed on me, his mouth moving soundlessly, repeating the same words over and over. But no sound ever came out. I couldn't sleep after that. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his face, his eyes staring through me, unblinking, unchanging. I started drinking coffee to stay awake, pacing the house at night, checking the locks over and over. I was afraid to sleep, afraid of what I'd see. I thought about leaving, packing up and driving away, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. I don't know why. It was like something was holding me there, something that wouldn't let me leave. And then, one morning, I looked out the window and saw Mr. Thompson standing in his yard, looking up at my house. He didn't wave this time. He just stood there, perfectly still, his head tilted slightly to the side, his face expressionless. I watched him for a long time, waiting for him to move, to wave, to do anything. But he didn't. He just kept staring, his eyes fixed on my window, as if he could see me through the glass. I backed away slowly, my heart pounding, the floor creaking under my feet. His eyes followed me, never blinking, never looking away. I went into the bathroom and locked the door, sinking to the floor, my back against the cold tile. I could still feel his eyes on me, even with the door closed. I don't know how long I stayed there. When I finally got up the courage to look outside again, he was gone. But his lawnmower was sitting there, perfectly lined up with the next row of grass, engine off, waiting for him to come back. But he never did. After that day, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was horribly wrong. It wasn't just Mr. Thompson anymore. It was the whole neighborhood. Every house, every person, every street. It all felt wrong, like a distorted reflection of the place I used to know. I tried to avoid looking out the windows, but it didn't help. I could feel them watching me, even when I couldn't see them. Every time I glanced outside, there was always someone there, standing too still, staring at my house. Sometimes it was Mr. Thompson, sometimes Mrs. Evans, sometimes people I didn't even recognize. But they were always there, always watching. I thought about calling the police, reporting them for trespassing, but what would I say? That my neighbors were standing in their own yards, looking at my house, that they weren't blinking? I didn't think anyone would take me seriously. Besides, the more I watched, the more I realized that they weren't just looking at my house. They were looking at me. Not at my window, not at my door, but at me, no matter where I was inside. Their eyes followed me from room to room, like they could see right through the walls. I stopped turning on the lights at night. I'd sit in the dark, my back against the wall, staring at the windows, watching their silhouettes move closer, then farther away. Sometimes they'd stand there for hours, not moving, not even shifting their weight, just standing perfectly still, faces turned toward me. It wasn't long before I started hearing things again. Footsteps on the porch, low whispers outside my door, the creak of floorboards just above my head. It didn't make sense. My house was a one-story ranch, no attic, no second floor. But I could hear them up there, pacing back and forth, their footsteps soft and steady, never stopping. One night I heard them whispering right outside my bedroom window. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was unmistakable. Low, murmuring voices, rising and falling in a rhythm that made my skin crawl. I lay perfectly still, my heart thudding so loudly I was sure they could hear it. I wanted to look, to see who was out there, but I was too afraid. I just lay there, staring at the ceiling, praying they'd go away. Eventually the whispers faded, but the cold, prickling sensation lingered, sinking deep into my bones. I didn't sleep at all that night. The next morning, I found footprints in the dirt outside my window. They were small, perfectly round, spaced evenly apart, like someone had been walking on tiptoe. But they didn't lead away from the house. They just stopped right at the wall, as if whoever made them had walked straight through the brick. I stood there staring at them, my mind struggling to make sense of it. I even reached out and touched the wall, half expecting my hand to pass through, but it was solid, cold and rough beneath my fingers. I went back inside and locked every door and window. I thought about leaving again. I even started packing a bag, throwing clothes and essentials together in a frantic rush. But then I heard the front door creak open. I froze, my heart leaping into my throat. I knew I'd locked it. I'd checked it twice. But I heard it, clear as day, the slow, deliberate groan of the hinges, the soft click of the latch. I dropped the bag and crept down the hallway, pressing myself flat against the wall. The house was silent, the air heavy and still. I peeked around the corner, expecting to see someone standing there, but the door was shut, the locks still bolted. I backed away, my mind racing. Had I imagined it? I could have sworn I heard it. But the door was closed. I started hearing it more after that. Doors opening and closing, floorboards creaking under invisible footsteps, whispers drifting through the vents. I even heard my name once, echoing faintly from the back of the house. I knew I was alone, but the voice was so familiar, so close, like someone was standing right behind me. I didn't check. I couldn't. I started leaving the TV on for background noise, just to drown out the whispers. But the voices on the screen sounded wrong, their words stretched out and garbled, like they were speaking underwater. Even the commercials were off, people with vacant eyes and stiff smiles, talking in slow, rhythmic tones that didn't match their lip movements. I turned it off and sat in the dark, the whispers growing louder in the silence. The next day, I saw Mr. Thompson again. He was standing in his yard, facing my house, his head tilted to the side, just like before. But this time, he was smiling. It wasn't a friendly smile. It was too wide, too stiff, his lips stretched taut across his teeth, his eyes unblinking and hollow. I closed the curtains and locked myself in the bathroom. I stayed there until the sun went down. When I finally came out, it was dark, and the house was cold. I went to the kitchen to turn on the heater, but when I flipped the switch, nothing happened. No hum, no click, just silence. I tried the lights, but they wouldn't turn on either. I checked my phone, but the screen was black. I pressed the power button, but nothing happened. I plugged it in, but the charger was dead too. No power, no light, no sound. Just cold, suffocating darkness. I felt my way to the window, hoping to see lights from the other houses. But the street was empty, every window dark, every house silent. I couldn't even see the street lights. It was like the whole world had gone dark. And then I saw them. Figures standing in the street, lined up in neat rows, perfectly still, perfectly silent. Their faces were turned toward my house, their eyes reflecting the faint moonlight, unblinking, empty. I recognized them, my neighbors, every one of them. Mr. Thompson was at the front, his head tilted to the side, that wide, hollow smile still plastered on his face. They didn't move, didn't speak, just stood there, staring up at my window. I backed away, my chest tightening, my legs shaking. I heard the whispers again, louder now, echoing through the darkened house. My name, over and over, in voices I almost recognized. I ran to the bedroom and slammed the door, locking it behind me. But the whispers followed, seeping through the walls, curling around me like smoke. I could still feel their eyes on me, staring through the darkness, through the walls, through me. I covered my ears, but it didn't help. Their voices were inside my head, echoing through my mind, pulling me closer. They're still out there. They've been there all night, just standing, waiting. I don't think they're going to leave. I don't remember falling asleep, but I woke up to the sound of footsteps. Slow, heavy footsteps, coming from the hallway just outside my bedroom door. They were steady, deliberate, each step sending a low, creaking echo through the house. I lay perfectly still, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. The air was cold, heavy, pressing down on me. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. I just lay there, staring at the door, watching the shadows shifting underneath. The footsteps stopped, right outside my door. I waited, my body frozen, every muscle tense. I thought about calling out, but my voice wouldn't come. I couldn't even bring myself to blink. I just kept staring at the door, waiting for it to open. The doorknob turned, slowly, the metal creaking as it twisted. I watched it move, inch by inch, the door trembling against the frame. But it didn't open. The footsteps started again, moving away from the door, back down the hallway. I listened, straining to hear, my heart thudding in my ears. The steps were uneven, dragging, as if whoever or whatever was out there was limping. I didn't move until I couldn't hear them anymore. When I finally got up the courage to open the door, the hallway was empty, dark and cold, the air thick with dust. But the front door was wide open, a faint breeze rustling the curtains. I didn't remember unlocking it. I stepped outside, my feet hitting the cold pavement. The neighborhood was silent, empty. No cars, no people, not even the usual hum of distant traffic. Just quiet, suffocating stillness. Then I saw them. They were standing in the street, just like before, lined up in perfect rows, their faces turned towards me. Mr. Thompson was at the front, his head tilted at that unnatural angle, his mouth stretched into that too wide smile. His eyes were fixed on me, hollow and black, reflecting the pale moonlight. The others were behind him, Mrs. Evans, Mr. Lee, all the faces I recognized, and some I didn't. But they were wrong. Their bodies were stiff, rigid, their heads tilted at identical angles, their faces twisted into the same vacant smile. They didn't move, didn't blink, just stood there, staring at me, their eyes shining in the darkness. I wanted to scream, but the sound caught in my throat. I took a step back, my legs shaking, but they didn't follow. They just watched, their smiles widening, their heads tilting further, bones cracking and popping as they twisted at unnatural angles. Then they started whispering. It was soft at first, a low murmur that grew louder, building into a churning, echoing hum. Their mouths moved in perfect unison, their lips forming the same shapes, repeating the same words over and over, but I couldn't understand what they were saying. The whispers grew louder, sharper, the words twisting and echoing through the street, bouncing off the houses surrounding me. I covered my ears, but it didn't help. The voices were inside my head, crawling under my skin, sinking into my bones. I stumbled back into the house, slamming the door shut. But the whispers followed, seeping through the walls, curling through the vents. I ran from room to room, locking every door, every window, but it didn't matter. They were everywhere, all around me, pressing in closer. I ended up in the bathroom. the smallest, darkest room in the house. I locked the door and sank to the floor, curling up against the cold tile, my hands pressed over my ears. But the voices were louder now, echoing off the walls, vibrating through the floor. They were calling my name. I squeezed my eyes shut, rocking back and forth, trying to block out the sound. But the whispers grew sharper, more insistent, their tones rising and falling in a rhythmic chant that made my head throb. Then the knocking started. It was soft at first, just a light tapping on the bathroom door, but it grew louder, more frantic, the wood shaking under the force. It sounded like dozens of hands, pounding in perfect unison, the rhythm matching the rise and fall of the whispers. I stared at the door, my body frozen, my mind screaming. The doorknob rattled, twisting back and forth, the metal groaning under the pressure. I heard my name again, louder now, clearer, echoing through the door, coming from the other side. It was my own voice. I scrambled back, pressing myself against the far wall, my heart thudding wildly. The whispers grew louder, overlapping, echoing off each other, rising into a deafening roar. The doorknob twisted harder, the hinges creaking, the wood splintering under the force. I covered my ears, closing my eyes, willing it all to go away. But the whispers were inside my head, burrowing deeper, wrapping around my thoughts, squeezing tighter and tighter. I could hear myself on the other side of the door, my own voice calling my name, over and over in perfect rhythm with the pounding. It sounded wrong, warped, stretched, like a recording played at the wrong speed. The door started to crack, the wood buckling inward. I heard my voice again, closer now, echoing through the splintering wood, cold and hollow, dripping with malice. It was still calling my name, but now it was laughing too. I closed my eyes, pressing my hands tighter over my ears, my body shaking. I felt the air grow colder, the shadows pressing in closer, the darkness swirling around me. Then the door burst open. I looked up, and I saw myself standing there, my head tilted at that same unnatural angle, my eyes hollow and black, my mouth stretched into that same too wide smile. I didn't scream. I couldn't. I just watched, frozen, as my own face stared back at me, its eyes fixed on mine, its lips moving silently, forming the same word over and over. My name. And then everything went dark. I don't know how long I was out. When I woke up, I was lying on the bathroom floor, the cold tile pressed against my face. The house was quiet, the air heavy and still. For a moment, I didn't move. I just lay there, staring at the cracked tiles, my mind struggling to piece together what had happened. But the memories came rushing back. The whispers, the pounding, that face at the door. My face. I sat up, my head spinning, my body aching. The bathroom door was closed, the wood splintered around the hinges, the knob hanging loose. But it was shut tight, no sign of what had forced its way in. I stumbled to my feet, gripping the sink for support, my legs shaking beneath me. I looked at my reflection in the mirror, half expecting to see that twisted, hollow-eyed version of myself staring back. But it was just me, pale and hollow-eyed, but still me. I didn't stay to look any longer. I left the bathroom, stepping into the hallway. The house was empty, dark and cold, the air stale and unmoving. Every door was shut, every window locked, just as I'd left them. But the whispers were gone. I walked through the house in a daze, my eyes scanning every corner, every shadow, waiting for them to come back. But everything was silent. Still. I looked outside, half expecting to see them standing in the street, but the neighborhood was empty. No figures, no faces, no one watching me. Just empty houses, dark windows, silent streets. I should have felt relieved, but I didn't. The air was too still, too heavy, pressing down on me, making it hard to breathe. I felt like I was being watched, even though there was no one there. I grabbed my keys and left. I drove for hours, through winding streets and empty intersections, trying to get as far away as possible. But every road felt the same. Every turn led me back to the same houses, the same trees, the same dark windows staring down at me. I circled the neighborhood 3 times before I realized I was back on my street. I don't know how it happened. I never turned around, never made a U-turn, but I was back. I could see my house at the end of the block, dark and empty, its windows staring back at me. I kept driving, my hands clenched tight around the wheel, my heart racing. I turned at the corner, trying to find another way out, but the road looped back around, leading me right back to my street. I tried again, taking random turns, weaving through side streets and back alleys, but every road brought me back to the same place, the same block, the same houses, the same windows watching me. I stopped in the middle of the street, my breath coming in short, panicked gasps. I could see my neighbors' houses dark and silent, the windows black and hollow. I could feel their eyes on me, staring through the glass, watching me from the shadows. I tried one last time, gunning the engine, tearing down the road as fast as I could. But I barely made it 3 blocks before I found myself back at my own driveway. I don't remember getting out of the car. I just remember standing in front of my house, staring up at the dark windows, my chest tight, my skin crawling. The door was open, just a crack, the darkness inside pressing against the frame. I stood there for a long time, my body frozen, my mind screaming at me to run. But my feet moved on their own, carrying me up the steps, through the door, back into the cold, silent house. Everything was just as I'd left it. Every door closed, every window locked, every shadow watching me. I walked down the hallway, my footsteps echoing through the empty rooms. I stopped in front of the bathroom door, my hand trembling as I reached for the knob. It felt cold under my fingers, colder than it should have been. I turned it slowly, pushing the door open, my heart pounding in my ears. The bathroom was empty, just as I'd left it. The mirror was cracked, a fine web of lines spreading out from the center, distorting my reflection. But it was just me, staring back, pale and hollow-eyed, but still me. I turned away, stepping back into the hallway. But as I walked away, I heard something behind me, a faint whisper echoing through the cold, empty house, my own voice calling my name. I didn't look back. I just kept walking, my footsteps echoing through the silence, the whisper following me, growing louder, closer. I walked through the house, through the rooms that felt too big, too empty, the shadows pressing in around me. I tried the door, but it was locked. I tried the windows, but they wouldn't open. I went from room to room, but every door was locked, every window sealed tight. I couldn't get out. I went back to the living room, standing in the center, staring at the walls that felt too close, too tall, stretching up into shadows that had no end. The air was heavy, cold, pressing down on me, crushing me. The whisper was everywhere now, echoing off the walls, curling through the vents, seeping through the floorboards. My own voice, calling my name, laughing, taunting, repeating the same words over and over. I'm still here. I don't know how long I've been here. I don't know if I ever left. I tried calling for help, but no one answers. My phone won't turn on. The lights won't work. The clocks don't move. I've been through every room, checked every door, every window, but they're all locked. There's no way out. I don't know how long I've been walking through this house. The rooms keep changing, the hallways stretching longer, the doors moving to places they shouldn't be. I see shadows moving at the corners of my eyes, faces watching me from the darkened windows. Sometimes I hear footsteps behind me, echoing mine, but when I turn around, there's nothing there. But sometimes I see myself, standing at the end of the hallway, head tilted at that unnatural angle, eyes hollow and black, smiling that too wide smile, watching me, waiting. I can't get out. I don't think I ever will.